How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Zayin, Daf 67 of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Friends, Daf Samach Zayin is gewaldig. The main focus of Daf Samach Zayin of Masechta Avodah Zarah is nosayn tam lifgam. There's basically two chapters, two sections of today's Daf. Bigadol, two major sections with the first section kind of has different parts to it, but defining nosayn tam lifgam. Now, this is really, honestly, today's daf is going to leak onto tomorrow's daf as well. Many of the topics here are going to appear on tomorrow's daf as well. But the first section of today's daf is defining nosayn tam lifgam. Although, again, as I said, this is really a 2-day kind of daf, but at least a definition of nosayn tam lifgam, and actually a few definitions of nosayn tam lifgam. And then whether nosayn tam lifgam is actually mutar or asur. We of course always assume nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. We're going to see that it is a machlokas. Tomorrow, actually, kind of both the first section and the second section are going to kind of come together. The first section of defining nosayn tam lifgam, and the second section of whether nosayn tam lifgam is mutar or asur. Tomorrow, really, we're going to now try to take that machlokas of whether nosayn tam lifgam is mutar or asur and try to figure out which definitions that machlokas applies to. But anyways, we will save that for tomorrow. Once again, Daf Samach Zayin, meaning Daf Samach Zayin, is once again a daf where there is copious amounts of tosfos, like insane amounts of tosfos, and yet no tosfos takeaways. It's interesting. There's like two gigantic tosfos on Daf Samach Zayin, but it's not like a great kasha, like a great teretz. So it's like, okay. So anyway, so there isn't even any tosfos takeaways. We'll mention a little diuk not in passing, as part of the sugya. We will mention a diuk from tosfos, but nothing really major in terms of the shir. And Chaver, let us jump into Daf Samach Zayin Masechta Avodah Zarah. It's going to be mamish gewalt. Okay, we are going to begin on Daf Samach Zayin Amid Aleph at the 2 dots, 2, 4, 5 lines into the daf. Zaklal Kol Shabana also b'nosayn tam v'chulei. Okie dokie. In our Mishnah, where was our Mishnah? 2 days ago? 2 days ago. The Mishnah from 2 days ago, the Mishnah at the end of the Mishnah, it said, Zeh klal, this is the rule, Kol Shabana also b'nosayn tam, also Kol she'eina b'nosayn tam mutar. That if there's nosayn tam, then it's also fine. But if there's no nosayn tam, i.e., if it's nosayn tam lifgam, okay, so if you have a mixture, and as we're going to learn about mamish right now, something falls into the mixture, lifgam, and it ruins the dish. So then, even though the thing that fell in, the ruinous thing that fell in, is asur, maybe it's orla, I don't know, whatever it might be, yenesa. If it's nosayn tam lifgam, if it ruins the dish, it's mutar. That's what our Mishnah said. Now, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, it says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that so is the halacha. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that this is halacha. Nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. That is the halacha. Okay. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, it says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Lashanu elo shenafa l'soch grisin roschin. Avo nafel grisin sonen in verticha naisek mishesh biachel v'sof pogam. The asur. The Gozabach changes pogam to pogam. I don't know if I'm going to read it pogam or pogam. I might read it both ways. I might read it one way, but say it another way. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. But anyways, Chaber, this is a big chilik, a big definition thingy. It's going to come up a lot in tomorrow's daf as well. The concept of poge meikaro or shbiach vasof pogmo. Poge meikaro or ishbiach vasof pogmo. That when we talk about nosayn tam lifgam, Or let me even just read it again inside and translate it, and we'll work through it together, and then we'll do some explaining here. So again, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Lo shanu ela, when we say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar, ela shenafa l'sol grisen roskin. If, let's say you have vinegar of yenesech that falls into hot split beans. You have vinegar you have yenesech that turns to vinegar. So vinegar of yenesech, you have asur vinegar that falls into hot split beans and immediately ruins it. I guess vinegar and hot split beans does not go good together. So basically everything was good. You add these hot split beans, they were going to be delicious. Some asur vinegar falls into it, ruins the dish. So we say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar, even though the vinegar is asur, but it's not doing any favors, not doing any flavors to the dish. It's ruining the dish, so it's not going to be asur. It's going to be mutar. Aval, but nafal esol grisen sonenin. But what if you had a cold split bean salad? Honestly, I don't know what split beans are. Is it split peas? No, but I don't know. Split beans, whatever they are. I imagine some kind of bean, lentil of sorts. But that would be lentils. But I don't know. Split beans, whatever they are, but some kind of bean salad. Let's say you had a cold bean salad and some vinegar falls into that. I don't know much about bean salads and vinegar, but I do understand that vinegars are used in salad dressings and things like vinegar kind of like provides, I think, like acid. I'm not like a chef or anything, but I think vinegar basically is a source of acid in dishes, and like I can imagine like a cold bean salad with like a bit of vinegar could actually be very nice. And the Gemara agrees. So nevertheless, agrees in sonin, if the vinegar, which is asur, falls into a cold split bean salad and actually improve the salad. It's made for a very nice salad. But then you heated up the split bean salad, and now that vinegar was activated negatively. And now that vinegar, which improved the salad initially, now ruined the salad. So that would be what's called hishbiach ulevasof pogem. That's what's called an ingredient that initially improved the dish, but ultimately ruined it. The asur, and that is asur. So now this is a big chilik that's going to come up today's daf, on tomorrow's daf, that in the context of nosayn tam lefgam, are we talking about poge meikaro? Are we talking about where it immediately ruined the dish? Where it immediately ruined the dish? What did I feel like in my slides maybe for tomorrow, did I say something? What did I say there? Oh, initially yuck or initially yum. All right, I'm not going to deal with that right now. I'll tomorrow I have to go over those slides anyways. But okay. Anyways, if the ingredient immediately ruined the dish, so we're saying that would be nosayn tam lefgam, right? This flavor was added, ruined the dish, nosayn tam lefgam, that's mutar. But if when the ingredient mixed into the dish initially was beneficial, initially it was a good thing, at a later point it turned sour, it became bad, but initially it was good, we are not going to say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar. If initially it was positive, well then even when it goes negative, that doesn't change the outcome. It's going to be asur. We're not going to say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar when initially it was positive. So again, we are saying that when we say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar, it's when from the moment that the ingredient was added to the dish, it ruined the dish. So this ingredient was added, ruined the dish. Nosayn tam lefgam is mutar, and the dish is mutar because this asur ingredient ruined the dish. It's mutar. But if when the ingredient was added to the dish, it initially improved and enhanced the dish, well then even if later on it goes south, it's going to remain forbidden. You have a forbidden ingredient that benefited the dish, nosayn tam l'shvach, it's going to be asur. And even if later on that same ingredient ends up ruining the dish, won't change anything. It's going to remain asur. So again, when we say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar, that is shenafal l'soch grease and roschen, that's if you have vinegar that falls into hot split beans and immediately ruins them. We say, okay, well, that vinegar ruined the dish. Nosayn tam lefgam is mutar. Avol, but nafal l'soch grease and sonin, if the vinegar fell into cold split beans and initially enhanced the split beans, and then but then you heated up the dish and heated up the vinegar, and now the vinegar ruined the dish. Now ultimately, that's not going to make it permitted. That would be considered what we call hishbiach. It initially enhanced the dish, and only later on was negative. That's going to remain asur ve'asur. V'chein kiosa Ravin, and similarly when Ravin came, Amar Rabbi Bachana and Rabbi Yechanan, l'shanu ele shenafal l'soch grease and roschen. When we say nosayn tam lefgam, that is when it fell directly onto the hot split beans and ruined the dish instantly. Avol nafal l'soch grease and sonin, but if it fell into cold split beans and initially enhanced the dish, and then later on you heated it up, it's ishbiach l'vasov pogim. Initially it was positive, only later on did it become negative. That is asur when it was initially enhancial. Beneficial, enhancement, enhance. I don't know. And similarly, when Rav Dimi came, he had a similar statement. And Taka, if you would visit Sipori, what's Sipori? There must still be a town named Sipori nowadays. But I don't know, do people go to Sipori? It must be in the north. Are there like Yidden who live in Sipori? Like what is that? Anyways, if you were to have back in the day gone to Sipori on Erev Shabbos, you would have found that the local dish for I guess that they would prepare on Erev Shabbos was taka split beans, and they would add vinegar to it, and they called it shachlaim, and it must have been a big hit if they did it every week over there. Now says Rish Lakish, nosayn tam lefgam she'amru lo she'amru kederzo chaser melach yiser melach chaser tavlin yiser tavlin el kol shein chaser klum ben necheles mipnei zeh. So says Rish Lakish, we're going to see Taki as another shita in a second, but says Rish Lakish that let's read it again inside. Rish Lakish says nosayn tam lefgam sham. When we say nosayn tam lefgam, okay, lo sheyomru, this is not talking about a case kidera zo chaser melach yiser melach. We're not talking about a scenario when the dish was already a mess. It already needed salt. It had too much salt. Chaser tavin yiser tavin. I didn't have enough spices. Had enough spices, and now this ingredient falls in, this vinegar or whatever falls in and just makes things worse. That is not what we're talking about. Rather, it's nosayn tam lefgam is when the dish was perfect. It was mamish tam gan eden. It was mamish, you were looking forward to sitting down and eating this dish, and then the vinegar falls in and ruins it. That's nosayn tam lefgam. If anyways, this was a mess of a dish that nobody wanted to eat anyways because it was disgusting, and then vinegar falls in it, that's not gonna be mutar because the nosayn tam lefgam was already a mess. So it says Rish Lakish, at least according to this first I don't even know what to say. The first version of Rish Lakish, that when we say nosayn tam lefgam, it's talking about a situation when the dish was mamish delicious. It was ready to be eaten. It tasted very good. Came the ingredient, this tam lefgam ingredient ruins the dish. But if it was already in a bad state before then, nosayn tam lefgam is not going to be mutar. It was already a mess. You can even argue in that case. I think Rashi says Tosfos points out as well, maybe in that case you could say maybe it's only l'fgam because it's not properly seasoned anyways. If it was properly seasoned, maybe then it would have, this ingredient would have interacted differently. Maybe it would have been good if it was seasoned properly. So says Rish Lakish, nosayn tam l'fgam is when the dish is mamish in a great state, and then comes this vinegar, let's say, and completely ruins it. That is nosayn tam l'fgam. Bikadam is those who say the opposite. Rish Lakish says Rish Lakish, nosayn tam l'fgam she'amru. When we talk about nosayn tam l'fgam, ein omrim kiderzo yiser chaser melach chaser tavin. We don't say that. We don't say this vinegar didn't really make a difference anyways because it didn't have enough salt. It had too much salt. It didn't have enough spices. It had too much spices. No, we don't say that. Ella hashta mia pogma. Rather, if right now this vinegar is coming and negatively impacting this dish, I don't care that it already was lacking salt. I don't care that it already had too much salt, was lacking spices, had too much spice. That makes no difference. If this vinegar is coming and ruining the dish, nosayn tam l'fgam. So we just saw two ways to see, two versions of Rish Lakish. The first version of Rish Lakish is that if the dish was already disgusting, we don't say nosayn tam l'fgam. According to the second version, it doesn't actually, that's irrelevant. Even if the dish was already disgusting, we'll still say nosayn tam l'fgam if the vinegar is making it even worse than it was. It's nosayn tam l'fgam. Okay, Givaldig. So now this is very interesting. Amr Babo says Babo. Amr B'Yechon, the name of B'Yechon. Kosha taimo umamosho. If you have the flavor and the structure, I don't know what the right word is for that, but for example, let's say we're talking about chaylev. You have some chaylev. Chaylev, of course, is forbidden fat that you're not allowed to eat. It's chiv kars if you eat it. You have some chaylev that falls into. So I don't know if we're talking about necessarily chaylev, because we're talking about makis. I don't know I imagine you wouldn't be chayiv makis for chaylev, chayiv kars, so you chayiv a korban chatas. But anyways, that may be a sheretz, I don't know. So some kind of isur falls in. Let's say a sheretz. If you eat a sheretz, I imagine you're probably chayiv makis. Let's say a grasshopper. Wait, but grasshoppers are mutar. So let's say certain grasshoppers. So let's say a mouse. Wow, but a mouse the Gemara is going to talk about that maybe tomorrow. Oh, sheesh. What's an example of something that would, I don't know, orla. How about that? Orla. Or yenesach. Yenesach. That's easy. Oh, no, but that's like a liquid. Sheesh. Let's say like some orla. Okay. So let's say you have like some, but Rashi does talk about chaylev. I don't know why he does talk about chaylev though. Why would he be chayiv makas for chaylev? Why would he be chayiv makas for chaylev? Chaylev is chiv karis or probably korban chatas. Why would you be chayiv makas for chaylev? I don't know. Like, what would be an example of something that you're not allowed to eat, that if it falls in, you'd be chayiv makas, and that would like positively. No, so the truth is, actually the Gemara does talk about a mouse, but Rashi talks about chaylev. I'm actually a little bit conflicted here, because Rashi literally talks about chaylev shenafel nimoach. I don't know why. Okay, look, I'll use chaylev because Rashi uses chaylev. I don't understand why Rashi uses chaylev, because there wouldn't be chayiv makas. I don't think there would be a chayiv makas by chaylev. Should we ask? Maybe let's ask Claude. Let's ask Claude real quickly. Would there be a chiyuv makos for eating chaylev? What does Claude say? No, there would not be a chiyuv makos for eating chaylev. Right. So I don't know why. Thanks, Claude. So I don't know why Rashi uses chaylev. Okay, I don't know. I'm going to use chaylev anyways because Rashi uses it, but I don't know why he uses it. Okay, so let's say you have chaylev that falls into some kind of mixture, and so if you have taimo umamashal, so if you have mamish the flavor of the chaylev, or maybe I don't know. So there's the flavor of the chaylev, and also the chaylev is mamish is floating in there. His mamish, it not only is the flavor there, it itself is there. You can almost see it. Well, in that case, kol shetaimo v'mamashu, when there's the flavor, and you can also see the thing itself, you could see the chaylev itself. Asur v'lokin olav. It's asur and there's makis. Maybe you could say maybe it's a separate thing. Maybe it's a separate thing. Maybe asur. Tosfos I think actually talk about it. Did Tosfos talk about it? Asur v'lokin olav. I mean the major. I don't know. So no, that wasn't somebody else. Anyways, maybe those are two separate things. Maybe like asur if it's like chaylev, i.e. asur is a chi of cars and stuff, and also if it's something else, I don't know, maybe like a mouse or something like that. The Gemara talks about, I think tomorrow, on how a mice could actually be roy shulchan melachim. It depends what kind of mice. But anyways, it's something, if it's something that be chayiv makas, you be chayiv makas. So they say if you could taste it and you could see it, taimo v'mamasho, so then asur, and there's a chiyuv makas. So k'zayis b'dei achilas pras. And this is k'zayis b'dei achilas pras. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that you don't have to eat the k'zayis of it in like one go, like in one bite. As long as you consume a k'zayis of the isur within the amount of time. I actually looked it up a few minutes ago, maybe an hour ago. So k'dei achilas pras means the amount of time that it takes to eat a bread that's 4 eggs worth. That's the size of 4 eggs. So the amount of time that it takes to eat that, I looked it up. It's a few minutes. So the point is, if you can eat a kazayis of the isur within a few minutes, so then if you could taste the isur and see the isur, then not only is it asur, but you'll be chayiv makis, assuming that you chayiv makis for whatever the isur is. However, taimo v'lo mamasho, if you can taste it, but you can't see it. So like, let's say you have chaylev that got dissolved. Chaylev is fat, and the fat dissolved, and you could taste it, but you can't see it. Asur, so it's asur. The ein lokin olam, but there's no chiyuv makas because you don't see it. Chevre, it's very interesting. Chevre, this is what's called ta'am ki'ikr. Chevre, this is what's called ta'am ki'ikr. Is the flavor of something like the thing itself? So here there's an interesting machlokes Rashi and Tosfos, which is taka quoted in a ginormous Tosfos, which begins on Daf Samach Zayin and ends on Daf Samach Zayin or Beis, but then really picks up again on Daf Samach Zayin or Beis, and then continues like at the bottom of and ends at the bottom of Samach Ches Amud Aleph. Ginormous Tosfos. But anyways, this is a very interesting machlokes Rashi and Tosfos about is tam ki'ikr mida oraisa mida rabbanon. Rashi says that tam ki'ikr, when there's the flavor of something, and the question is the flavor like the thing itself? So Rashi says, well, tam ki'ikr is only midrabanan, and because it's only midrabanan, there's no chiyuv makis. When there's just the flavor, but you don't see the thing itself, so then there's no chiyuv makis because tam ki'ikr is only midrabanan. Tosfos argues and says tam ki'ikr is midoraisa. Also, then why is there no chiyuv makis over here? So that if it's the raisa, it should be chiyuv makis. So it says Tosfos, because this is talking about a mixture. Now it's talking about a mixture. He says dafka min b'mino. This is an interesting taka. I think he's going to get more into this in Masechta Chulin. But anyway, it says Tosfos, we're talking about a mixture where it's min b'mino and it's batal b'rov. Kilomida oraisa, we're talking about where the isser is less than a majority. So mida oraisa, it should be batal b'rov. Mida rabbanon, it's asur. And therefore, because when we say shishim or kolshu, but anyways, when we say it's you're chayiv even for less, even when it's mida oraisa batal b'rov, but you're still chayiv, you're only going to be chayiv mida rabbanon, not mida oraisa, and therefore there's no makis, even though tam ki'ikr is mida oraisa. Right, so even though the flavor itself is midoraisa, however, the flavor is a minority of the dish, and therefore midoraisa is batal b'rov. Midorabanan, it's also, but there's not going to be chiyuv makis for that. So it's a very interesting machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos about is the concept of tam ki'ikr asur midoraisa, like Tosfos says, or midorabanan, like Rashi says. The in riva. Tam livgam mutar. Now, if you add, however, to the mixture a negative flavor, mutar, then it becomes permitted. V'lema im nosan tam lifgam mutar. Why not say if you added a negative flavor, it's mutar? Why say if you Why not say if you placed a negative flavor? Why say if you added a negative flavor? Kamashman is teaching us what the point of in riba tam lifgam is teaching that even if there was already negative flavors in there, but now you added to the negative flavors with some asur, it's still mutar. Rish Lakish, and it's teaching that the halacha is like the second version of Rish Lakish. Remember, Rish Lakish had two versions. The first version was that if the dish was already disgusting, well then the nosayn tam lifgam is not going to make it mutar. But the second version was that it doesn't matter if the asur is negatively impacting the flavor, it is permitted, and that is what we're saying over here. That if you added tam lifgam, if you added a negative flavor, even though there was already negative flavors, but now you added negative flavors, we're saying then it will be mutar like the second version of Rish Lakish. So far we've seen some very interesting definitions of nosayn tam lifgam. Right? Initially we started off by saying nosayn tam lifgam is only when it initially is immediately ruinous. We also saw the opinion of Rish Lakish that it's nosayn, if we go based on the second version of Rish Lakish, that nosayn tam lifgam is mutar even when the dish was already disgusting. Along the way, we saw the very interesting machlokes Rashi and Tosfos that tam ke'ikr. And now we are getting up to the next section of the daf, whether nosayn tam lifgam is mutar or asur, the machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Shimon about is nosayn tam lifgam in fact mutar? Maybe it's taka asur. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amr of Kana, midivrei kulam nilmad, from all of these, where we saw a lot of people so far. We saw Rav Yehuda Shmuel, we saw Ravin, we saw, who else did we see? Rav Dimi, I think somebody else as well. Maybe not, maybe yes. Well, we saw Rabbi Yochanan. We saw a lot of Rish Lakish. So we saw a lot of people. So if God is me divrei kulam, from all of them, Nomad will learn nosayn tam lifgam mutar. So we see everyone's basically of one opinion that nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. Amle Abayis is Abayis b'shlomo b'kulu l'chayit. So I understand from all of the rabbis that we mentioned, Rish Lakish, Abaye argues that actually if you look at what Rish Lakish had said, what did he say? He said, Rish Lakish nosayn tam lifgam she amru, that they said. And then we say, even if it's already disgusting or whatever. So actually, if you look at Rish Lakish, at how he worded his statement, he says, Sha'amur, that they said, Abaye is medayik that maybe Rish Lakish himself doesn't actually believe that nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. Maybe Itaka says it's asur, but anyways, okay, fine. Rish Lakish, maybe he himself doesn't know that way. Now, does this imply, right, when Rav Kana said, nosayn tam lifgam mutar, does that imply that, right, that there is actually a shita out there? Right, what does that say? From the fact that I'm reading Rashi, from the fact that Rav Kana needed to say that, so from all these rabbis will say nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. Is there actually, did we actually think otherwise? Where am I? Does that imply that there is actually an opinion out there who says nosayn tam lifgam is asur? We always assume nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. Is there actually an opinion that nosayn tam lifgam is asur? Yes, there is. Divrei Meir, says Reb Meir, that actually it's not just nosayn tam l'shvach that's asur, but even nosayn tam lifgam is asur, according to Reb Meir. Reb Shimon Omer l'shvach asur, lifgam mutar. Whereas Reb Shimon says nosayn tam l'shvach, if the asur imparts flavor beneficially, it's asur, but detrimentally, lifgam is mutar. So actually we see that whether nosayn tam lifgam is mutar or asur is a machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Shimon. My time with Reb Meir. How come Reb Meir says nosayn tam l'vgam is asur? Gomer mi gi'ule of de kuchavim. He learns it from gi'ule of the kuchavim. What's gi'ule of the kuchavim? The Torah talks about after the Yidden had an altercation, got in a fight with the Midianites. So it says, Kol davar sheyavu ba'esh taviru ba'esh. I believe that basically after the fight with Midian, so the halacha was that any pots, anything that may have had, non-kosher foods or also any isser in the pots, you have to burn them. Any pots or whatever that were used for cooking isser, you have to kasher the pots. Now, so he learns. So my time to Meir says nosayn tam l'vgam is also gomer migule of the kavim. He learns that from the fact that after the fight with Midian, the Bnei Yisrael had to kasher all of the pots. Gule of the kavim, lav nosayn tam l'vgamu, wasn't gule of the kavim, not nosayn tam l'vgam. Right, because if we're talking about their pots, so we find an empty pot. So when was this pot used? Mistama not today. It's probably used yesterday. So a pot that's used today is what's called ben yomo. A pot that's used today it's called ben yomo. But if the last time it was used was not today, it was yesterday, it's not ben yomo. And then any flavor that may have been absorbed in the walls of the pot are already not going to be enhancing any flavor in anything that's cooked in that dish. Actually, any flavor that might be absorbed in the walls would be detrimental, would be nosayn tam l'vgam. Any flavor that's absorbed in the walls already more than, from yesterday already, it would be nosayn tam l'vgam, it would be detrimental. And therefore, Reb Meir argues that the Torah says that any pots that they had found there by Midian had to be kashered, even though mistama was nosayn tam l'vgam. That must mean that nosayn tam l'vgam is a problem, and therefore they had to kasher the pots so that there wouldn't be any tam at all, to remove any possible tam. Right? Wouldn't giule of the kavim be nosayn tam l'vgam? The asur achmono, and nonetheless the Torah says you have to kasher it in order to be able to use those pots. So therefore also nosayn tam l'vgam in general is also according to Reb Meir v'idach, whereas Reb Shimon would learn Kirav huna b'eder of Chia, Rav Huna b'eder of Chia le asur Torah elo k'deir bas yoma delo l'vgamu. That says Rav Huna b'eder of Chia that when the Torah says that you have to kasher these pots, it's only if they were ben yomo. If it's only if those pots were used today, because if it's used today, so then what do we say? So we say delo l'vgamu. Let's go weiter for a second. V'idach k'deir bas yoma yefshir delo pag b'purta. Whereas Reb Meir says that even if it's so, Rashi learns that basically what Rav Huna b'eder of Chia is saying is that ben yomo means that it's l'shvach. Okay, so if you had this pot that was used today for some kind of isser, and then if a yid is now going to cook in that pot on the same day that it was used for isser, so then it's ben yomo, and it's going to be nosayn tam l'shvach. Any flavors that got absorbed in the pot earlier that day will then impart positive flavors, enhancing flavors into whatever the yid is then going to cook in it. So if it's ben yomo, then it's be'etzem nosayn tam l'shvach. It would be positive, and therefore Rav Huna b'eder of Chia is saying that when the Torah says you have to kasher those pots, it's because they were ben yomo. They were used that day, and that's why you had to kasher it. But if it was from the day before and it was nosayn tam l'vgam, then it would be mutar. You wouldn't have to midoraisa kasher it in that scenario. The idach, whereas Reb Meir says k'deir bas yoma nami efshelo dilo pagma porta. Even a k'deir bas yoma, even if that pot was used that day, it's still not going to be exactly nosayn tam l'shvach. Even if it was used earlier earlier that day, whatever flavor was absorbed in the walls would have at least deteriorated slightly. And therefore it was enough that it would be considered some level of pagam, and still the Torah says you have to kasher those pots. So, and then Reb Meir then extends that broadly and says that just like by Midyan, it was nosayn tam lifgam and you had to kasher the pots, whether because it was from the day before where it's mamash nosayn tam lifgam, or whether it was even ben yomo, but there was still at least a little bit of nosayn tam lifgam, and the Torah says you have to kasher it, so we see nosayn tam lifgam is asur. Tosfos Taka says actually, in a humongous Tosfos, that Reb Shimon actually does agree with Reb Meir. He does concede to Reb Meir that ben yomo would also be yeshut pagmo porta, that ben yomo also would, the flavor would deteriorate somewhat, but that Reb Shimon doesn't consider that it would be only pagma porta. It would only be a little bit of a pagam, not enough. Right? So in the context of Gulei of the Chom, so we're going to say that is, right? So we're going to say that you had to kasher the pots in that case, but we're not going, but if it was a significant, if it was like, for example, not ben yomo from the day before, or if it was mamish nosayn tam lifgam, he wouldn't extend it. Right? So even though by Gulei of the Chom, yes, you had to kasher those pots, and yes, maybe there was a little bit of pagam there, but not enough to say that nosayn tam lifgam in general is asur. If it's kind of a pagmo, right, rabba, if it's a lot of pagam, so then it would be mutar. Whereas Reb Meir says no, just like even though there's a little bit of nosayn tam lifgam by the Gulei of the Kochavim, Reb Meir says that's enough that we're going to say that nosayn tam lifgam across the board is asur. Whereas Reb Shimon says no, if it's ben yomo and it's just a little bit of pagam, so then we'll say that is still going to be asur, and you have to kasher that, and nosayn tam lifgam, and that, when it's ben yomo, just a tiny bit of pagam, so that is asur. But anything more than that, any deterioration more than that would already be mutar. But anyways, bigadol, we see that Reb Meir says nosayn tam lifgam is asur, and Reb Shimon says nosayn tam lifgam is mutar. Reb Shimon, my time, how come Reb Shimon says nosayn tam lifgam is mutar? The sign that we learned in the Bible said lo sochlu kol, or maybe the snan, or dichsiv, because it says lo sochlu kol nevel lager sheb'sharecha, that the pasuk says don't eat any nevela, give it to a ger toshav in your neighborhood. Kriya nevela, where am I? Kol ha're'uri leger kriya nevela she'en re'uri leger ein kriya nevela. So Reb Shimon says that from the fact it says by nevela, you can't eat nevela, but give the nevela to a ger toshav. So Reb Shimon wants to be medayek that if it's in a state that it can be given to a ger toshav, so then it would be considered nevela. Right? The definition of nevela is unslaughtered meat that is in a state that it can be given to your neighbor who is not Jewish. However, if it got so rancid that it's not roi l'maychol adam, that it's not fit for human consumption, well then that you wouldn't give it to your neighbor, that it's ruined, then that wouldn't be considered nevela. So we see that nosayn tam lifgam, that when the flavor goes south, it's going to ruin it. It's no longer going to be considered nevela. Whereas Reb Meir says ahu lemute sucha meikar. Whereas Reb Meir says that what's excluded from that pasuk is not that if it was initially meat and then kind of went bad, but rather if it was, let's say, for example, Rashi was like a mukas shchin, if it came from some disgusting animal to begin with, so in that case that would be a problem, which is interesting because we're going to get into this tomorrow. It's interesting. It kind of touches on what we talked about at the beginning of the daf today, right? Pogmo me'ikara versus ishbiach l'laso pogmo, right? Tosfos Taka talks about this tomorrow. But anyways, without getting into the details of it, right? Kind of you could see the discussion now the argument now between Reb Shimon and Reb Meir is that Reb Shimon is saying is that you had this meat that was initially good and then went bad, and he's saying it's nosayn tam lefgam and it's mutar. Whereas Reb Meir is saying no, that would be asur, but if it was me'ikar, it was saying it would be mutar. Anyways, this gets into what we get tomorrow of where exactly does the machlokas apply, but it's interesting to see already here that Reb Meir is saying that nosayn tam lefgam would be mutar if this meat came, if this nevela came from a disgusting animal already, but if it was good meat that went bad, Reb Meir would say it would be asur. But again, don't worry about the technicalities about pogam me'ikar or ishbiach v'sov pomo. We're gonna really unpack that tomorrow a lot more. Whereas Reb Shimon says, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that if this meat was disgusting to begin with, that it wouldn't be considered nevela, that if it was disgusting to begin with, it would just be considered dirt. I don't need a pasuk for that. That was Daf Samach Zayin of Masechta Avodah Zarah. So Daf Samach Zayin was like, not a very long daf, but there were like two main kind of sections, but each section really packed a real punch. So defining nosayn tam lefgam. So we're talking about poge me'ikaro versus a shbichol of a sof pogmo. So we said that when we say nosayn tam lefgam is mutar, what we said today at least is that it's mutar when it's poge me'ikaro. That initially, from the time that this flavor is introduced, it's ruinous. But if it's initially was good and only later ruined it, for example, if you have vinegar that falls into cold split beans and later it's heated up and ruined, and then later ruined it when it was heated up, that would be asur, we said. We had two versions of Rish Lakish. The first version of Rish Lakish was that in order to say nosayn tam lefgam, it would have to be in a situation where the dish otherwise would have been delicious, and then this flavor come and ruined it. But the second version, which we seem to paskin like, which we seem to accept, is that even if the dish was already in a monodik state, in a milchig state, and then came this flavor to make things worse, it would still be considered nosayn tam lefgam, and it would be mutar. Rabbi Yochanan had said something very interesting, which is flavor with structure, right? If we had tam and mamosho, taimo vim mamosho, it's asur and you'd be chayiv lashes. If you have only the tam without the structure, without seeing the thing itself, it would be also without lashes. That got into the machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos about tam ki'ikr. Rashi says that tam ki'ikr is asur midirabonon, whereas Tosfos says tam ki'ikr is asur midoraisa. And then we got into the machlokes whether nosayn tam lefgam is mutar or asur. So the machlokes of Meir and Reb Shimon. Reb Meir says nosayn tam lefgam is asur. Reb Shimon says nosayn tam lefgam is mutar. And tomorrow we are going to continue to go deeper into this machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Shimon to understand where that machlokes applies. That was Daf Samach Zayin of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.